Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of antebellum Alexandria, Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. In 1835, amid the cobblestone streets and federal-style mansions of Alexandria's affluent district, wealthy tobacco merchant Jeremiah Blackwood's household became the center of an inexplicable phenomenon. Blackwood had risen from modest circumstances to prominence through shrewd business maneuvers documented in Fairfax County commercial registries, acquiring 3 competing tobacco warehouses between 1827 and 1830, thus establishing a near monopoly on Virginia leaf exports to European markets. The Alexandria Gazette frequently featured advertisements for Blackwood's premium Virginia tobacco, alongside mentions of his donations to the Christ Church Building Fund and appearances at Governor's Socials, where, according to Society columnist Margaret Winslow, Mr. Stations, Blackwood stands ever on the periphery, observing rather than participating in the gaiety around him. His marriage to Eleanor Rutherford in 1829, daughter of a declining but respected Tidewater family, was described in contemporary accounts as a union of pragmatic design rather than affection, with Eleanor's cousin writing in a private letter, later preserved in the University of Virginia archives, that poor Eleanor has traded her family name for financial security and the coldest marriage bed in Virginia. What remained undocumented until historian Dr. James Whitmore's examination of Blackwood's personal correspondence in 1902 was the merchant's extensive communication with controversial European physicians, particularly Dr. Heinrich Müller of Vienna and Dr. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck of Paris, whose theories on blood inheritance and transmutation of species were considered radical and morally suspect. Blackwood's letters, according to Whitmore's published notes, revealed an obsessive interest in the fundamental mechanisms of heredity, particularly the determination of physical characteristics across generations and between races, with several references to experimental approaches that caused even the controversial European scientists to respond with caution. Blackwood's library ledger, recovered from auction records, shows subscriptions to obscure medical journals and purchases of restricted scientific texts that would have required special permissions and considerable expense to obtain in 1832 America. Eliza entered the Blackwood household on the 17th of October 1832, arriving from the Harrington plantation in South Carolina, under circumstances that would later prove significant to understanding the macabre events that followed. Household ledgers, discovered during the 1905 renovation of the Blackwood estate and now preserved in the Alexandria Historical Society archives, reveal that Jeremiah Blackwood paid the extraordinary sum of $1,200 for Eliza, nearly triple the typical price for an enslaved woman of her age, with a notation in the margin reading "specimen of particular qualities and features." Martha Winters, the Blackwood housekeeper whose personal diary was donated to the Virginia Commonwealth University collection in 1928, recorded her initial impressions of Eliza as uncommonly refined in speech and bearing, with skin the color of light amber and eyes of an unusual shade that shifts between green and gold depending on the light. According to Winters' subsequent entries, Blackwood immediately assigned Eliza to indoor duties, primarily maintaining his study and laboratory, despite the household's established hierarchy being disrupted by such preferential treatment. Most unusually, as noted in the household staffing records, Blackwood arranged private accommodations for Eliza in a converted storage room adjacent to his private study, separated from the quarters where the other 7 enslaved individuals resided, a decision that, according to Winters, has caused considerable discord among the staff, with Cook threatening to poison the master's tea. The most revealing evidence of the household dynamics comes from a collection of letters written by Eleanor Blackwood to her sister Catherine in Richmond, discovered in Catherine's estate following her death in 1879. In correspondence dated the 30th of January 1833, Eleanor wrote, "Jeremiah spends hours conversing with this woman Eliza. not as master to slave but as student to teacher, often emerging from his study with pages of notes. By spring of that year, Eleanor's suspicions had intensified, as she confided. I have observed him watching her with scientific scrutiny, measuring the proportions of her face with his eyes, examining her hands, her gait, even the texture of her hair when he believes himself unobserved. I fear he maintains her not as a servant but as some manner of living specimen for studies he will not name. The true extent of Jeremiah Blackwood's scientific pursuits remained obscured from public knowledge until 1964, when renovation work at the Alexandria Public Library uncovered a cache of documents sealed within a wall cavity, presumably hidden there by Blackwood himself or an associate following his death. Among these papers, catalogued now as the Blackwood Scientific Collection in the University of Virginia Special Archives, were detailed schematics for a sophisticated laboratory constructed beneath the Blackwood residence, with notations indicating specialized ventilation systems, reinforced sound-dampening walls, and, curiously, a series of drainage channels leading to the nearby Potomac River. Blackwood's experimental journals, bound in calfskin with brass locks that had to be forced open by the archivists, revealed his initial work focused on plant hybridization, with particular emphasis on creating impossible crossings between species that naturally resist grafting. One entry from February 1833 reads, "Success with the third-generation rose lily hybrid, which displays characteristics of both progenitor species yet exists as something entirely novel in botanical classification. Evidence that the fundamental barriers between disparate life forms are more permeable than natural philosophy has heretofore acknowledged." By late 1833, according to subsequent journal entries, Blackwood had progressed to animal experimentation, documenting attempts to crossbreed distinctive varieties of dogs, rabbits, and, most disturbingly, primates acquired at considerable expense from maritime traders with connections to African and Asian ports. A letter discovered among the papers, written by Dr. Anton Mesmer of Vienna following a visit to Alexandria in early 1834, expressed both fascination and profound concern. "Your ambitious endeavors to challenge God's natural order through the manipulation of reproductive processes have reached a threshold I cannot in good conscience traverse with you. Your references to potential human applications betray a dangerous abandonment of moral constraint that compels me to terminate our association forthwith." The final pages of Blackwood's journal contain increasingly erratic entries documenting successful animal hybridizations alongside complex mathematical calculations related to human gestation periods and cryptic references to preparations for the ultimate experiment scheduled to begin in spring 1834. The first documented evidence of Eliza's pregnancy appears in Eleanor Blackwood's correspondence to her sister Catherine, dated the 3rd of September 1834, wherein she writes with thinly veiled distress, "The woman Eliza appears to be with child, though no man on our property could possibly be responsible, as Jeremiah keeps her isolated from all other servants with a vigilance bordering on mania." Eleanor's subsequent letters, preserved in the Richmond Historical Society collection, chronicle her husband's increasingly aberrant behavior, noting on October 17 that Jeremiah has arranged for Dr. Phillips to examine Eliza monthly, not in the manner of a master concerned for valuable property, but with the methodical scrutiny of a scientist monitoring an experiment of great significance. Court depositions taken during the 1836 investigation following Blackwood's death include testimony from household staff, particularly from groundskeeper Thomas Wells, who reported that the master would lock himself in his study for days at a stretch, emerging haggard and wild-eyed only to check on Eliza, taking measurements of her growing belly and noting them in a leather-bound journal he carried constantly. Martha Winters, in her household accounts, documented Blackwood's installation of new locks on Eliza's quarters in December 1834, after which only he possessed the key, bringing her meals personally and forbidding any staff from entering under threat of severe punishment. By January 1835, Eleanor's correspondence reflects escalating alarm, as she describes Blackwood muttering calculations regarding gestation periods and fetal development that no tobacco merchant should possess. and preparing specialized equipment in the basement laboratory, the purpose of which I dare not contemplate. In what would become her final letter before departing Alexandria, dated the 12th of February 1835, Eleanor confided to Catherine, "I can no longer abide in this house of scientific blasphemy, for I have glimpsed Jeremiah's journal and the anatomical drawings therein, diagrams of reproductive processes annotated with formulas and modifications that defy both natural law and divine ordinance. I fear he is not merely awaiting this birth but actively creating something that should not exist in God's world." On the 17th of March 1835, Christchurch parish records document the birth of twins to the enslaved woman, Eliza, property of Jeremiah Blackwood, with an unusual addendum noting the infants present with dramatically dissimilar appearances, one fair with ruddy features, the other dark-complexioned, raising questions of separate parentage. The attending midwife, Sarah Coleman, provided a sworn statement that remained sealed in county archives until its discovery during a courthouse renovation in 1912, wherein she described the birth in terms revealing both professional composure and profound disturbance. "Having delivered over 300 infants in my 40 years of practice, I have never witnessed nor imagined a birth of such unnatural character as that which occurred in the Blackwood home. The first child emerged with skin as pale as alabaster and fine auburn hair, bearing a striking resemblance to Master Blackwood himself, while the second, delivered merely 12 minutes later, possessed dark skin and features consistent with its mother, yet with eyes of a color I have never before observed in any person, neither white nor colored." Coleman's testimony further recounted Blackwood's behavior during the delivery, stating that he exhibited none of the typical discomfort or distance that gentlemen usually maintain during the birthing process, instead observing with scientific intensity, taking detailed notes, and expressing unnerving excitement when the disparate appearances of the infants became evident, exclaiming that the experiment has succeeded beyond all expectation. Dr. William Phillips, summoned to examine the newborns, subsequently refused to sign the birth certificates or official documentation, writing in a letter to the Medical Association, later recovered from his personal effects following his death in 1857, that he could not, as a man of science and Christian principle, authenticate these births which present impossibilities of nature that defy all established understanding of human reproduction and heredity. The doctor further noted that he advised Blackwood to seek immediate baptism for these unfortunate creatures, but that the merchant had dismissed such concerns with disturbing levity, remarking that these children are not products of God's creation but of man's ingenuity, and thus require no divine blessing. News of the extraordinary birth spread through Alexandria with remarkable speed, despite Blackwood's attempts at discretion, with the Alexandria Gazette of the 24th of March 1835, making veiled reference to unusual occurrences at a prominent merchant's household that have sparked considerable speculation among citizens of refinement. Society columnist Amelia Thornton noted that the Blackwood residence has become conspicuously absent from recent social engagements, with invitations neither extended nor accepted following certain unsavory rumors regarding unnatural additions to their household. Business correspondence preserved in the Alexandria Commerce Association archives reveals the rapid dissolution of Blackwood's commercial relationships, with tobacco broker Harrison Montgomery writing that "I have terminated all dealings with Blackwood, as have most reputable merchants in the district, for while the nature of his domestic irregularities remains unconfirmed, the consistency of accounts from household staff presents risks to one's reputation that no prudent businessman can afford." The Mercantile Bank of Alexandria's private records, unsealed in 1890, show that Blackwood's previously substantial credit line was revoked on April 11, citing character concerns and instability of future prospects. Most revealing is the diary of Reverend Thomas Whitfield, elder of Christchurch, who recorded visiting the Blackwood home, writing, "Today I beheld with my own eyes the infants who have caused such fervent whispers throughout Alexandria. and I confess that even my steadfast faith was shaken by the sight of these creatures who seem neither fully one thing nor another, as though God's clear boundaries between his created races have been deliberately obscured. The Reverend noted that the fair child bears such uncanny resemblance to Blackwood himself that questions of paternity would be unavoidable, while its twin presents even more disturbing anomalies, concluding that the Blackwood household now exists in complete isolation, shunned by former friends and associates, their names spoken only in hushed tones, as though the very mention might spread contamination. Eleanor Blackwood returned to Alexandria on the 8th of May, 1835. Her reluctant homecoming documented in a letter from Catherine Rutherford to their cousin in Baltimore, noting that Eleanor returns against my strongest counsel, driven by some misguided sense of Christian duty toward a household that has surely abandoned God's natural law. What Eleanor discovered upon her arrival would remain undocumented until 1923, when renovation workers at the former Blackwood residence discovered her private diary sealed within a wall cavity behind the master bedroom's fireplace, its leather binding marked with a simple cross. The journal's early May entries reveal her profound horror upon first seeing the twins, recording that they reside in a specially constructed nursery adjacent to Jeremiah's laboratory, attended not by a typical nurse but by Jeremiah himself, who measures and documents their every development with scientific precision rather than paternal affection. Most disturbing were her observations of the infant's development, noting that, though barely 2 months in age, both children display physical and cognitive advancement consistent with babes of twice their age, with the fair child especially showing an unnerving awareness in its gaze that no infant should possess. The diary chronicles Blackwood's obsessive documentation, describing how Jeremiah maintains meticulous records of their growth rates, skeletal measurements, and emerging traits, celebrating particularly when the dark child displayed unexpected patches of lighter skin along its extremities, and the fair child developed unusual gold flecks in its otherwise blue eyes. On May 14, according to her increasingly frantic entries, Eleanor confronted her husband in his laboratory after discovering journals detailing his experimental procedures performed on Eliza before and during her pregnancy. The diary recounts their argument in which she denounced his ungodly work that perverts the Lord's natural order and the proper boundaries between the races, threatening to expose his blasphemous experiments to both legal authorities and ecclesiastical judgment. Blackwood's response, as recorded in her trembling handwriting, reveals his complete descent into scientific obsession. My dear, you fail to comprehend the historical significance of what I have achieved. These children represent the future of mankind, the proof that human bloodlines can be scientifically directed rather than left to chance and chaos. I have created life that transcends the artificial boundaries of race and inheritance. On the 21st of June, 1835, the Alexandria Town Registry contains the first official documentation of the twins' disappearance in a sheriff's report filed after Eleanor Blackwood sought authorities' intervention, claiming that the infants previously residing in the Blackwood household have vanished without explanation, along with their mother Eliza. The subsequent investigation, detailed in county records, unsealed in 1887, reveals that Sheriff Thomas Hargrove and 2 deputies conducted a thorough search of the Blackwood property, during which they noted a peculiar chemical odor emanating from the basement laboratory and discovered unusual equipment of apparent medical or scientific purpose that defies explanation by any conventional understanding of household apparatus. According to the deputies' sworn statements, Blackwood maintained remarkable composure throughout the search, informing authorities that the infants succumbed to a congenital weakness 3 days prior and were buried on the eastern edge of the property alongside their mother, who perished from childbed fever that had remained dormant until suddenly manifesting. When pressed on the absence of a physician's certification of death or proper funeral arrangements, Blackwood reportedly presented documents signed by Dr. Franklin Pierce of Baltimore, who, upon subsequent investigation, proved impossible to locate in Maryland medical registries. The sheriff's report details the examination of the grounds where Blackwood claimed the burials took place, noting that despite thorough excavation of the indicated area, no evidence of recent interment was discovered. Particularly disturbing was Deputy William Foster's documentation of the nursery, which had been meticulously stripped of all evidence of habitation, scrubbed with caustic chemicals, and rearranged to serve as an ordinary storage room. Though Sheriff Hargrove formally listed the case as deaths unverified, bodies unrecovered, his personal correspondence with the governor expressed profound unease. "I have investigated countless deaths throughout my tenure, yet never have I encountered circumstances that so disturb my fundamental understanding of natural possibilities, nor a suspect whose demeanor suggests the dispassionate satisfaction of a scientist whose experiment has reached its anticipated conclusion." In the weeks following the twins' disappearance, Blackwood's psychological deterioration accelerated dramatically, documented in the medical ledger of Dr. Samuel Whitmore, whose records were donated to the Alexandria Medical Society in 1874. The physician noted on the 3rd of July, 1835, that Mr. Blackwood presents with severe insomnia, persistent tremors of the hands, and episodes of dissociative rambling wherein he speaks of reclaiming his creations and completing the final phase, symptoms suggestive of a profound derangement of the rational faculties. Subsequent entries track Blackwood's descent, with Whitmore recording on July 17 that the patient's condition has deteriorated to include auditory hallucinations, paranoid delusions regarding rivals attempting to steal his research, and periods of catatonia alternating with frenzied activity in his laboratory. Neighbors' accounts, preserved in affidavits collected during the subsequent investigation, report unearthly sounds emanating from the Blackwood residence throughout the night hours, with retired schoolteacher Margaret Wilson describing wails that seemed neither fully human nor entirely animal, accompanied by rhythmic mechanical noises and occasional flashes of unusual light from the basement windows. The Alexandria Evening Post of August 9 contains a brief notice that Mr. J. Blackwood, formerly prominent in tobacco commerce, has withdrawn entirely from public life, with delivery men reporting all provisions left at the door, as no servant remains willing to enter the household. The culmination of Blackwood's decline came on the 24th of September 1835, when Eleanor discovered his body in the basement laboratory. The coroner's report, unusually detailed for the period and sealed by judicial order until 1897, describes finding Blackwood suspended from a ceiling beam, having employed a mechanical apparatus of his own design that allowed for slow asphyxiation rather than immediate cervical fracture. Most disturbing was the coroner's documentation of extensive ritualistic scarification across the deceased's chest and abdomen, self-inflicted based on the presence of a bloodied scalpel in his right hand, forming a complex geometric pattern interspersed with symbols resembling both alchemical notations and anatomical diagrams of human reproductive organs. A final journal entry, found clutched in Blackwood's left hand, contained only the cryptic statement, "They live. My children walk between worlds. The boundaries between bloodlines dissolve. I follow them now across the final threshold." The judicial proceedings following Blackwood's death took an unprecedented turn in February 1836, when court documents from the Alexandria Circuit Court, eventually unsealed during a judicial review in 1901, reveal that the investigation was abruptly terminated by executive order. Governor William Giles's directive, marked confidential and delivered by special courier rather than through standard channels, instructed that all materials, testimonies, and physical evidence relating to the Blackwood matter are to be immediately sealed under authority of the Commonwealth, accessible only by direct gubernatorial permission. This extraordinary intervention sparked private protest from Judge Harrison Montgomery, whose letter to the Virginia Attorney General discovered among his papers in 1885 questioned the legal basis for suppressing investigation into matters that, while disturbing in their particulars, fall squarely within the jurisdiction of this court and the public's right to judicial transparency. The true motivation for this high-level intervention remained obscured until 1840, when independent journalist Thomas Kincaid published the first of what was intended to be a series of exposés in the short-lived reformist newspaper, the Virginia Inquirer. Kincaid's initial article, titled Scientific Abomination and Civic Conspiracy, alleged that Blackwood's experimental work enjoyed not merely the tacit knowledge but the active protection of certain influential figures in Alexandria society, naming specifically 3 physicians, a prominent banker, and at least one elected official who participated in correspondence and private gatherings where Blackwood shared his advances in human modification. Only one issue containing these allegations circulated before the Krashen. Inquirer's printing press was destroyed in an unexplained fire, with Kincaid himself disappearing from public record thereafter. His research materials, rediscovered in 1,922 inches the possession of his granddaughter, include interviews with former Blackwood associates suggesting that powerful interests feared Blackwood's experiments, not because they violated natural law, but because they had succeeded beyond expectation, threatening the very racial categorizations upon which Southern social order and economic systems depended. Particularly damning was a fragment of a letter from physician James Morrow to an unnamed colleague stating that, should the true nature of Blackwood's achievement become general knowledge, the carefully maintained boundaries between white and Negro would be revealed as permeable and artificial rather than divinely ordained, a revelation whose implications for our society cannot be countenanced, regardless of scientific merit. Following Blackwood's death, Eleanor departed Alexandria permanently, leaving the property in legal limbo as distant relatives contested inheritance claims amidst rumors of the house's unnatural taint. Alexandria tax records show the estate remained vacant from 1835 until its eventual sale to the Westbrook Development Company in 1904, with property tax assessments noting repeatedly that structure remains unoccupied due to persistent public associations with unfortunate events. During these decades of abandonment, the once prestigious residence deteriorated into what the Alexandria Gazette in 1867 described as a crumbling monument to tragedy and madness, its windows broken, its gardens overgrown, a blighted spot in our otherwise recovering district. The property's sinister reputation grew through generations of local folklore, meticulously documented by anthropologist Dr. William Barrett in his 1890 collection, Supernatural Beliefs of the Chesapeake Region. Barrett recorded 17 distinct accounts from Alexandria residents describing unusual phenomena associated with the prawn sign. Abandoned Blackwood House, most notably the persistent sighting of 2 children of unusual appearance, one fair as dawn, one dark as dusk, both with eyes that glowed like amber in candlelight, visible at the upper windows only during the full moon. Particularly unsettling were consistent observations that the children never appeared to age, being reported with identical descriptions from witnesses spanning 3 generations. Barrett's interviews with elderly resident Martha Collins revealed claims that, on certain nights, strange lights dance in the basement windows, and sounds like distant machinery can be heard emanating from beneath the earth. African American oral histories collected from former enslaved people included references to the twin beings who are neither fully alive nor truly dead, bound to the house by terrible science that defied God's natural order, with multiple accounts warning that those who glimpse the twins directly will be driven to madness. Local children transformed these rumors into dares, with Barrett documenting the schoolyard chant, "Blackwood twins, neither day nor night, peek at the windows when the moon is bright, one is darkness, one is light, see them once, die of fright." The Blackwood mystery might have remained confined to local folklore had it not been for the discovery made on the 12th of June 1905, when renovation workers preparing the long-abandoned property for modern development broke through what appeared to be a solid basement wall, revealing a concealed chamber that had remained sealed for 7 decades. According to the detailed police report filed by Inspector James Harlow, preserved in Alexandria Municipal Archives, The hidden room measured approximately 20 feet square, excavated substantially deeper than the main basement, with walls lined in lead sheeting and an elaborate system of copper pipes feeding into collection vessels. The architectural assessment, commissioned by the Alexandria Historical Society and completed by Thomas Reynolds, noted that the chamber was deliberately designed for concealment, with sophisticated acoustic dampening features and a separate ventilation system that vented through a modified chimney flue, rendering it virtually undetectable from the main residence. Most disturbing were the room's contents, meticulously catalogued in the police inventory. A surgical table equipped with leather restraints sized for both adults and small children. Glass cabinets containing hundreds of preserved biological specimens in solution, labeled with alphanumeric codes. Specialized equipment bearing resemblance to medical instruments, but modified for purposes that defy conventional explanation. The drainage system, which Reynolds described as unnecessarily elaborate for any legitimate purpose, featured channels carved into the stone floor leading to a central collection basin with copper piping that extended beyond the property boundaries toward the Potomac River. Dr. Margaret Wilson, consulting for the Alexandria Medical Association, examined the recovered instruments, reporting that, while many resemble standard obstetrical and surgical tools of the period, significant modifications render them unsuitable for recognized medical procedures, suggesting application to experimental practices outside the boundaries of accepted science. Particularly chilling was the discovery of a metal cabinet containing dozens of glass slides with biological samples, each meticulously labeled with dates corresponding to Eliza's pregnancy and the twins' brief documented existence. The Virginia Scientific Journal's subsequent analysis noted that many slides contained cellular structures that defy classification within established taxonomic categories, appearing to combine characteristics of disparate human racial types in configurations that should be biologically impossible, according to current understanding of hereditary science. The most significant artifact recovered from the hidden chamber was a leather-bound journal labeled Experimental Proceedings. Crossings of bloodlines, discovered sealed in a lead box behind a false wall panel, its 342 pages documenting in meticulous detail Blackwood's systematic pursuit of human hybridization. Alexandria Chief of Police Michael Donovan, recognizing the document's sensitivity, transferred it to the custody of the Virginia Medical College, where Dr. James Harper led a team in analyzing its contents behind closed doors. Harper's heavily redacted report, submitted to the governor in September 1905 and partially declassified in 1947, reveals that Blackwood administered specialized compounds to Eliza without her knowledge over a period of 14 months. Preparations designed to alter her reproductive physiology through methods derived from his correspondence with discredited European scientists. The journal detailed how Blackwood had harvested reproductive material from himself, systematically modified it through chemical processes, exhaustively documented in his experimental notes, and introduced it to Eliza through medical procedures performed while she was sedated with chloroform. Most disturbing were Blackwood's clinical observations of the resulting pregnancy, noting that the twin embryos developed in a single womb yet maintained distinctive genetic characteristics that should be scientifically impossible, suggesting successful biological partitioning through chemical intervention. Accompanying the journal were dozens of preserved biological specimens, including tissue samples, blood specimens in various stages of experimental modification, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be developmental tissue from the twins themselves. The University of Pennsylvania's Department of Biological Sciences, after receiving anonymized samples for analysis, reported that the cellular structures exhibit unprecedented anomalies that defy scientific explanation, containing characteristics that appeared deliberately engineered rather than naturally occurring. Their confidential assessment, leaked to the Baltimore Sun in 1907, concluded that, if the provenance claimed for these specimens is accurate, they represent an achievement in biological manipulation that modern science cannot replicate nor fully comprehend. suggesting capabilities in genetic modification that should have been impossible in the 1,830 seconds without knowledge and techniques discovered decades later. The final piece of the Blackwood puzzle emerged in April 1907 when landscapers preparing the property for redevelopment discovered a shallow grave beneath an ancient oak tree on the eastern perimeter, marked only with a small stone bearing the letter E. The Alexandria County Medical Examiner's report, filed on April 23 and sealed until 1952, documents that the exhumed remains are consistent with a female of mixed African descent, approximately 25 years of age, with skeletal indicators suggesting multiple childbirths. What transformed this discovery from mere confirmation of Blackwood's claims into profound horror were the unmistakable signs of extensive medical experimentation visible on the remains. Dr. Thomas Winters, who conducted the examination, documented evidence of at least 7 separate surgical procedures performed ante-mortem, including unusual incisions along the abdominal wall that correspond to no recognized medical treatment of the period. Most disturbing was Winters' observation that the cranium bears evidence of primitive trepanation, with 3 distinct bore holes positioned over areas now associated with the brain's reproductive regulatory functions, suggesting deliberate access to these regions while the subject lived. Tissue samples preserved by the unusual chemical composition of the soil revealed systematic administration of unknown compounds that altered cellular structures in a manner consistent with specimens recovered from Blackwood's laboratory. The Virginia State Forensic Bureau's subsequent analysis, completed in 1908, concluded that based on evidence of partially healed surgical trauma, the deceased survived for approximately 4 weeks following the final procedures, contradicting Blackwood's claim that she died from childbed fever. The most poignant discovery among Eliza's remains was a small copper locket clasped in her right hand, its surface engraved with intertwined initials that expert analysis suggested had been carved by Eliza herself using a nail or similar implement. When opened, the locket contained 2 locks of hair bound together with thread, one auburn and straight, the other dark and tightly curled, presumed to be from the twins. Microscopic examination of the hair samples in 1953 would reveal structural properties inconsistent with typical human hair, including unusual medullary patterns and pigmentation distributions that suggest deliberate modification at the biological level. In 1998, when the Smithsonian Institution's newly established Center for Historical Genomics requested access to the preserved Blackwood specimens, the Alexandria Historical Society reluctantly released tissue samples that had been maintained in specialized preservation fluid for over 160 years. Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery, leading the analysis team, published heavily redacted findings in the Journal of Historical Biology indicating that the genetic material, remarkably well preserved due to Blackwood's advanced preservation techniques, reveals manipulation of cellular structures that would require technical capabilities not documented until the mid-20th century. Montgomery's private correspondence with colleagues, leaked to the Washington Post in 2001, expressed profound scientific confusion. The specimens display deliberate genetic modifications that should have been impossible given the technological limitations of the 1,830 seconds, suggesting either extraordinary scientific innovation lost to history or intervention from sources outside the recognized scientific establishment of the period. Attempts to conduct more comprehensive analysis faced unexpected resistance when the Alexandria Historical Preservation Coalition, comprised primarily of descendants from the city's founding families, filed an injunction preventing further testing, citing ethical concerns regarding genetic privacy and religious objections to disturbing human remains. Their successful legal action ensured that the most advanced genomic analysis techniques remain unapplied to the twine. Blackwood specimens, which now reside in climate-controlled storage beneath the Alexandria Medical Museum. Perhaps the most tantalizing aspect of the mystery lies in the final pages of Blackwood's journal, overlooked in initial analyses but highlighted by historian Rebecca Stevens in her 2004 monograph, Unnatural Selection: The Blackwood Experiment. These entries, dated after the twins' reported deaths, include cryptic references suggesting a different fate. My children thrive beyond the constraints of conventional existence, having transcended the boundaries their creation was designed to challenge. They walk unseen among both worlds, belonging fully to neither. Most disturbing is Blackwood's apparent knowledge of similar experiments, as he notes. Communication established with the Charleston group, whose work parallels mine though their methods differ. The Baltimore subject reportedly unstable, but the Richmond twins flourish. Our collective progeny may yet establish the new lineage we envision. These references remain uninvestigated, the families named in Blackwood's coded entries still prominent in their respective cities, their ancestral records sealed by private agreement with state historical societies.